I think this rate hike was really more symbolic than anything. It's certainly not really useful in controlling the inflation situation we're in. Nowhere near enough to actually get that under control, in my opinion, based on what I've seen. But it's just like, how do you continue to raise rates when I haven't looked at the exact GDP numbers recently, but I'd have to assume that we're in a situation where we're probably in a stagflation situation where we're not really growing, but inflation's off the charts. So do you see another rate hike coming, or do you think that this was the symbolic rate hike that we were going to have to sort of control inflation?
No, I think we've heard everything. Like at the beginning of the year going into 2022, I mean, I think there was a Scotia analyst that came out and said we're going to see like 8 straight hikes. So I think there's definitely 1 or 2 more to come at some point. I don't know if we're going to see the 8 or the 6 that some people talked about, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a second one at some point, whether it was end of this year or somewhere around next year. But I think there's going to be another one.
Just touching on that, I also think there has to be, but I think that our economy isn't as strong as people think it is.
No.
I think if you take a little scratch off the top layer, you realize that a lot of small businesses are struggling. Paying back those government grants and loans, that's going to happen within the next, I think, 12 months. I don't think a lot of people who really are supporting our economy can do it. And if you start raising interest rates, it's not just mortgage payments. It's credit cards, lines of credit, car payments. Like, I think we move into a recession. You start increasing rates, everything squeezes.
There's a concept like taught in economics, like when I started taking the course, like where you understand what real GDP is versus nominal GDP. And so nominal is the actual dollar value, like how much did we increase? And I just pulled this up while we were talking. So 6.7% year over year increase in our GDP in Canada for January 2022. So that seems good, right? That's like good economic growth historically. And then they're admitting to a 5.7 inflation rate. Like what are we at right now? Somewhere in that ballpark?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So basically we're almost even if you believe their inflation number, which I mean, there's plenty of reason not to. Look at real estate, look at food, look at gas. But those things aren't included necessarily, right? So that's the problem. So if you really factor in like what's real inflation, if you really factored in all the things we have to buy, we're in a recession right now based on real growth figures, right? So that's what I'm saying when I say like, how can they really continue to increase rates if they want the economy to grow? That's the tough part, right? Can anyone really answer that? Because obviously the way we calculate the consumer price index is a little flawed. So not to go too deep on this tangent, but
yeah. I think you also need to take a look at the power structure of our country. We have liberal government, and if you're liberal, it's fine. But like we have a liberal government who is in a situation that is being very tough to manage a country with, and then you have inflation that's burning red hot on the other hand, and if the government is shown as raising interest rates, and people would say that it's the government's decision to do it. So if the government was seen as that, then they would decimate our entire market and it would throw us into a huge recession. But if you let the silent killer, which is inflation, which isn't anybody's fault, being blamed on COVID and Ukraine and Russia, then you have to let that go long enough. The average person is just going to complain about their asset price or the things rising, right? So I think it's almost like a little bit of a waiting game with the government too, at the saving face. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah. It's hard to go on precedents though, right? Because like this situation is so unique. Like it's really hard to know. And plus like government policy has been a lot less predictable, as you sort of indicated there nowadays than traditionally, right? Like traditional economic policy was a little easier to predict. So yeah, you're right. We'll see. But I mean, I think that this is all the more reason that, make sure you pad your cash flow numbers when you buy properties, find creative ways to create income so that you're not riding on the lines. So if we do get a 4 or 5% rate increase, that you're ready for it if it happens.
5%. That's terrifying.
Correct me if I'm wrong too, but Canada's GDP is pretty heavily dependent on immigration as well too, right?
They're pulling in 400,000 people a year, and we can only build 200,000 new houses. So if you also want to know why housing's going up, that's a big part of it.
That's it, right? I mean, we're like we've been built on this system of reliance of immigration. There's nothing wrong with obviously immigration coming in, but when you have a system that is just so heavily tied upon that, and everyone's screaming that it's broken, it's just how do you go about and fixing that, right?
I think if we want to talk abstractly, how can we fix things? combine like a massive deregulation of industries, try and bring manufacturing and production here, go back away from this heavy red tape on all these industries, and bring workers back here, drop the minimum wage down, because you can't make a $12 an hour worker worth 15 by making minimum wage 15. You just put the $12 an hour worker out of work. That's all that happens. So drop the minimum wage down, give people who maybe live with their parents still and don't need to make much a chance to learn on the job. And if we do that, I think we can actually reverse even some of this inflation.